Okay. So have you heard about this case in India's Supreme Court? It's about a woman, 2 kids, and a whole can of worms about like who's considered a father.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Like how DNA testing is sort of shaking up these fundamental ideas about family.
Totally. And it brings up how we balance individual rights and societal norms and all that.
Yeah.
So our source material today is this article from the Indian Express. It came out on January 29th, 2025. The title is Presumption is Husband is Father of Child Born in Valid Marriage. SC rejects plea for DNA test.
Whoa, that's a mouthful. But I mean, it really gets to the heart of the issue, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So the case is about this woman who had a daughter back in 1991.
Okay.
And then a son in 2001, all while she was married. Later on, she claims her son's biological father is someone else, not her husband.
And she didn't just say it casually, right? This was a serious claim. After they got divorced in 2006, she actually tried to change her son's birth registration, officially, with the Municipal Corporation of Cochin, but they wouldn't do it without a court order.
That makes sense. So that's what kicked off this whole legal fight.
Exactly.
It went all the way to the Supreme Court. It makes you wonder, if she was that determined, what kind of evidence did she have?
Well, that's where Indian law gets interesting. There's this thing called Section 112 of the Indian Evidence Act.
Okay.
And it basically creates this strong presumption that if a child is born within a marriage, it's legally the husband's.
Oh, I see. So that's the big obstacle she was up against.
Right. Now, it's not like that presumption is unbreakable. You can challenge it, but the burden of proof is super high. You'd have to show, without a doubt, that the husband couldn't possibly be the father, proving he was somewhere else entirely during the relevant time period.
Oh, so if he was out of the country or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's what they call proving non-access.
Non-access, got it. Wait, so even with DNA tests being so available these days, it's still about proving non-access to these cases, not the DNA itself.
Well, in this case, that's the precedent the Supreme Court stuck with. They didn't order a DNA test.
Wow.
And ended up rejecting both the woman and her son's plea. They really leaned on the existing evidence that already showed the child was legitimate. And because non-access wasn't proven, that was kind of the end of it.
So they're saying the DNA test is less important than this idea of non-access.
You've hit a key point there. This decision, it really sparked debate about whether DNA tests, being so readily available, should change how we look at paternity in legal situations. The court acknowledged that DNA tests could be helpful, establishing the biological truth, but they were really worried about the potential downsides, the harms. It's like they were saying, we have this legal system for a reason, let's not just toss it out because there's new technology.
So they were prioritizing stability, sticking to legal principles over a more definitive biological truth. It makes you think, what if we did start doing DNA tests for every paternity case?
Yeah.
Chaos, maybe.
Well, that's where the court's concerns about privacy and dignity come in. Think about it. People questioning the legitimacy of kids born within marriages left and right. It could create huge distrust, tear families apart.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. It's not as simple as saying DNA solves everything, huh? But what about the child's right to know who their biological father is? Wasn't that part of their argument?
The court addressed that, definitely. They recognized the child's interest, but they also said there's potential for emotional distress, social stigma, from messing with an already established family. It's a tough one, balancing a child's right to know versus the potential harm to them and their social standing.
Right. It's a delicate balance. Did the alleged biological father get involved in this whole thing? What arguments did he bring to the table?
Oh, his lawyer was all about defending the current legal system. He argued there was zero compelling evidence to overturn that presumption of legitimacy. In fact, he pointed out the evidence actually supported the child being legitimate and the husband being the father. Basically, he was saying, look, they haven't met the burden of proof. Let's stick to the process we have.
So it seems like the court had to juggle a lot of different factors, not just the scientific evidence from a potential DNA test.
Absolutely. This case, it goes way beyond this one family. It makes us think about how we define family as a society, how much weight we give to biological versus legal paternity. And then there's the big one. What happens when DNA tests become so easy to get? How does that impact our legal systems and, even the fabric of our society?
Really gets you thinking, doesn't it?
Right.
What happens to the very idea of family when anyone can get a DNA test.
More questions than answers at this point. But hey, that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Yeah, for sure. We've only just started to dig into this. There's a lot more to unpack. Like, what are the long-term implications of this decision? And what does it mean for cases that come up in the future? We'll get into all that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how one case can open up so many questions about ethics and the law.
And it's not like this ruling came out of nowhere. It reflects a much bigger conversation happening in society about the role of technology, especially when it comes to our personal lives.
Right. It's way bigger than just this one woman and her family. This decision impacts, anyone really who might be thinking about a paternity test or, people who value their family privacy and keeping those relationships kind of sacred.
The court definitely seemed aware of that. They even specifically talked about what they called collateral infringement of privacy, basically meaning ordering a DNA test could end up revealing parts of someone's life that they never expected or consented to being out there. It makes you think about all those unintended consequences, right? What if someone goes and gets a DNA test without really understanding, what it might uncover? What if it reveals secrets that were better left buried?
Exactly. And the court, they didn't shy away from those potential harms either. They talked about how finding out a child's parentage could lead to that social stigma, not only for the child, but also for the parents. Can you imagine the gossip, the judgment, people maybe even being ostracized from their community?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like that. But okay, wouldn't some people argue that the truth is the most important thing? People have a right to know their biological origins, even if it, shakes things up in the family.
That's a good point. And it's something the court definitely grappled with, too. They acknowledged that the child has an interest in knowing, but they also said that right isn't absolute. In this case, they felt that protecting the family unit, its stability and dignity, outweighed that specific right.
So are they basically saying that sometimes, for the good of the family, it's better to not know everything?
Yeah, it's a really tough issue. There's no doubt about it. And it raises even more questions about what role the legal system should have in these really personal matters. Should the courts be the ones deciding what's true in families? Or should they be more focused on keeping existing families together, even if, maybe it's not 100% biologically accurate?
Reminds me of this friend I have who found out he was adopted, but way later in life. It totally changed how he saw himself, his whole family history. He was glad to know the truth, but he admitted it was painful and confusing too.
That's a really powerful example of how these kinds of revelations can have such a huge impact on people, on families. It shows why we need to be careful and sensitive when dealing with, paternity issues and family secrets.
So where do we go from here? It seems like this case is saying Indian courts aren't quite ready to say DNA testing is the answer in paternity cases. But with technology changing so fast, is it just a matter of time before things shift?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This ruling sets a precedent, but precedents can be challenged, overturned. It'll be really interesting to see how future courts deal with these technologies that keep evolving and these social norms that are always changing.
It feels like we're right on the edge of a major change in how we think about family, about being a parent. This case could be a turning point in that evolution.
I think you're right. It's a tiny glimpse into a much larger transformation happening in society, one where biological truth and these tech advancements are making us rethink our ideas about family, identity, even the nature of truth itself.
This deep dive has really shown that we're all living through this change together, trying to make sense of it as we go.
And there are no easy answers. Each case, each family, each person will have to figure out how to navigate these complexities in their own way.
Yeah, but maybe that's the whole point, right? To keep having these conversations, to recognize the challenges, and to try and create a future where technology, it empowers us to make informed choices about our families without sacrificing our privacy or our dignity or the well-being of those we love.
I couldn't have put it better myself. This case, even with all its, twists and turns and contradictions, it encourages us to have a deeper conversation, a more thoughtful one, about what it actually means to be a family in this crazy 21st century.
We've talked a lot about the potential downsides of DNA testing and why the court wanted to prioritize privacy and stability. But what about the other side? Are there arguments for using this technology more? Benefits the court might have missed.
That's a great point, and it's something that definitely deserves more attention. The court's decision makes sense given the specifics of this case, but we shouldn't forget about the good that can come from DNA testing. In a lot of situations, knowing the truth about your biological parents can be empowering, even healing.
Like, I'm thinking about situations where someone might have a health condition that runs in the family. Knowing their biological family history could be crucial for their health.
Exactly. And what about those cases where a child is trying to connect with their biological family for personal reasons or cultural ones, denying them that chance just to protect an existing family structure? I don't know. It seems kind of unfair, maybe even ethically wrong.
Right. So even though the court had these valid concerns about privacy and potential harm, it's important to remember that DNA testing can also bring, like, clarity, connection, even a sense of closure.
For sure. This whole case highlights the need for a more nuanced approach, one that recognizes both the good and the bad that can come from DNA testing. We need to look at each case individually, not just make these big pronouncements.
It's about finding that middle ground, right?
Yeah.
Balancing the right to know with the need to protect families and prevent, unnecessary harm.
And that's a tough balancing act. It's something our legal systems and society as a whole will be dealing with for a long time.
This case also got me thinking about the bigger picture of family law. Like, are we heading toward a future where DNA testing is the only way we determine paternity? What would that mean for the whole idea of legal parenthood?
It's definitely a possibility, and one that raises a ton of legal and ethical questions, like how would it change child custody agreements, inheritance rights, even the definition of family?
Those are huge questions. We don't have the answers yet, but they're questions we need to start thinking about now. As technology keeps advancing, we need to be prepared for the way it will affect our legal systems and our social structures.
This case is like a wake-up call, telling us to have those tough conversations and start thinking critically about how we want to shape the future of family in a world where knowing the biological truth is becoming easier and easier.
It's a reminder that technology is powerful, but it's just a tool. It's up to us as a society to decide how we use it and what values we want to prioritize, especially with all this transformative potential.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground today, going from the specifics of this case to the broader implications for family law and, even the meaning of being a parent. But there's one more really important aspect we should talk about, the potential for misuse of DNA technology.
Oh, for sure. We can't just ignore the darker side of all this. How could DNA testing be used in bad ways or exploited?
That's a key question, and one that often gets lost in all the excitement about what DNA testing could do. Imagine someone using a DNA test to blackmail someone else, threatening to expose a family secret or ruin their reputation.
Or even discrimination, right? Could people be denied jobs, housing, maybe even insurance based on what their DNA says about them?
Those are real concerns, and they show why we need strong legal protections, ethical guidelines around how DNA information is used.
It's like this case shows us that with every new technology comes a darker side. It's up to us to see those risks coming and put safeguards in place to protect people's rights and prevent misuse.
It's a tricky balance. On one hand, we have all this potential for DNA technology to do good, to connect families, even save lives. But on the other hand, there's the potential for harm, exploitation, discrimination.
Definitely a balancing act. We need to approach it with, excitement, but also caution.
Well said. This whole deep dive has really shown how important informed consent is, protecting privacy, and thinking about the ethical side of things when we're talking about DNA technology. It's not just a scientific tool, it's a force that can change how we see ourselves and our relationships.
We've talked about, the good and the bad, the ethical stuff. But what about the bigger picture? Where does this case leave us as a society? Where are we headed?
That's where things get really interesting. This isn't just some, isolated court case. It's a sign of things to come, where technology is making us redefine these really basic ideas like family and being a parent.
I'm picturing a world where DNA tests are as normal as going to the doctor for a checkup. What happens then?
Think about how society might change. Imagine knowing your biological family is just a click away. Would more people go looking for their biological relatives? Would family reunions be more common, but also way more complicated?
And what about the legal system? Would we need to, completely change how we deal with paternity cases, inheritance, maybe even adoption?
Those are all good questions, and I honestly don't think anyone has the answers yet. This case is like we're just dipping our toes into this huge unknown ocean.
Okay, but bringing it back to right now, we've looked at both sides of DNA testing in this case. But zooming out even further, what does this tell us about, like, truth versus privacy?
Yeah, that's the classic dilemma. This case really shows that tension, you know? We have this need to know, to find out the truth about ourselves, where we come from, but we also want privacy, the right to keep our own stories private and protect our families from, everyone's eyes.
So how do we find that balance? How do we decide when the need to know the truth is more important than someone's privacy?
That's a question each society, each person has to figure out. There's no easy answer, no one solution that fits everyone. It's about weighing the good and bad, thinking about everyone's rights, and recognizing that ethics, law, and technology, they all play a part.
It makes you wonder, in a world where it's harder and harder to keep secrets, will we start to value privacy even more? Or will we just get used to, like, having our personal lives out in the open?
It's fascinating to think about. Maybe this case will get people talking more about the limits of technology, the importance of informed consent, and how the very idea of truth is changing.
After this whole deep dive, I'm starting to see this case as more than just a legal thing. It's like it reflects our anxieties about the future. We're dealing with technology changing so fast, social norms shifting all the time, and we just don't know what it all means for our relationships, who we are,
You're exactly right. This case is a tiny version of the big challenges we're facing as a society, trying to navigate this uncharted territory of the 21st century.
So to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. How much do you value truth versus privacy in your own life? Where do you draw the line? These aren't just like abstract questions anymore. As technology keeps changing everything, these are real dilemmas we'll all have to face.
Yeah, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, even when things feel uncertain, there's something beautiful about how complex human connection is.
And that wraps up our deep dive into this incredible case from India's Supreme Court. We hope you learned something new and maybe even came away with more questions to think about.
Until next time, stay curious.